Good morning. I guess it's 8:30 already, so let's begin. Hi, my name is Margarita Rivera. I'm a soil health planner here at in the Tremont office in northern Utah. Um, I'm going to introduce Braden McMurdie, and it was actually a pleasure to meet him in the Tremont area. So, yeah, let's give him a round of applause. And if you want to come up and just introduce yourself and go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Marguerite. I'm going to put this in here, I guess. So if I hold on to it, and then I get sweaty palms, then I'm chasing the microphone around, right? So, okay, maybe I'll do that when it's over. Well, I'm surprised there's this many this early in the morning, so I'll try and keep you awake. Like Buzz said, maybe I'll have him come tell some one-liners if it gets too boring. I'm Braden McMurdie. I titled this slide Our Soil Health Conversion because some of the experiences we've gone through that's kind of opened our eyes and helped us see things in a maybe different way, or maybe some would call it a better way to do things. And so hopefully I can share those with you this morning, and some of the successes we've had, and maybe some of the things not to do, and some things we tried that didn't work. So this is our operation when the snow comes off. I don't know if any of you feel that way. And then about 2 weeks later, that's what it looks like. So a little bit about our operation. We farm and ranch in northern Utah, Tremont area, and southern Idaho. We run close to about 500 irrigated acres. We're growing primarily silage and grain corns, alfalfa, wheat, and other small grains like oats and barley, and then, of course, cover crops. And we're dabbling on the verge of whether cover crops are becoming our cash crop or not, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got some range ground in southern Idaho. It's about an hour away. I wish it was connected to our farm ground. I think we could do a lot more. I'm sure some of you feel that way, but anyway, unfortunately, it's not, and that's the way things are. So we float around 250 to 300 mother cows. When there's no grass, you have less cows, right? That's how it works. No water, no grass, and some stockers, cattle. So I asked this question, why cover crops? So this is why we got into cover crops. Primarily, we were looking to extend our grazing. And then we started thinking about more on the soil side of it, to keep something growing in our fields, keep something green, keep something alive. And that also tied in heavily with grazing, of course. And the idea there, the first idea was that we had these gaps between, maybe like after a wheat harvest or even after corn silage gets taken off, where the field's just sitting there and it wasn't helping us any, wasn't producing anything. So. And then somewhere along the line, someone told us that we could decrease our input costs if we started down this path and got our soil healthy. So then we started looking into that. I'm not sure who to blame for all that, but I'll find out who it was, and we'll get even someday. That's really started us on a path. And then grazing cover crops can be profitable, and I'll talk more about that. But I wanted to share this quote. I stole this from Don Campbell. It's something that when I heard it, it really hit me. If you want to make little changes, change the way you do things, right? The day-to-day stuff, the little mundane tasks, do them a little better, fine-tune them. You'll have little changes. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And for me, that's what soil health became, a different way to see our operation and see the way that we can improve our soil and progress. So I'll share a little bit about, that's a turnip, by the way, that I pulled out of our garden. It didn't want to come out of the ground. It's about bigger than my head. And I have a big head, so. A little bit about how we started. We started quite a few years before we really heard about cover crops. We were doing something simple that I guess fits into this category, like watering our wheat back. Just like I said, just to graze something later. And lo and behold, that was improving our soil a little bit. We were still heavily tilling it back in 14 and 15. We did start to, have our local co-ops come and blow some different varieties of cover crop seeds on after a wheat harvest. So we kind of got started that way. And then we got into polycultural mixes, multi-species. Our mixes got bigger. We found some things that worked. We like teff grass and turnips and radishes and things after wheat crop, and it kind of snowballed from there. But this picture here, I keep this not because it really shows anything impressive, but it just reminds me where we got started doing strip tests. We'd till next to a strip that wasn't tilled, and then we'd plant the same thing and irrigate it the same way and fertilize it the same way. And we were just trying to figure it out. So I kind of keep that to remind me maybe how far we've come a little bit. And I still recommend that often when people ask me, do your test plots, do your sample plots, try different things in different places. So in 2017, we bought our own no-till drill, and we were able to start drilling our own mixes, and we got a little more versatile that way. So again, because we didn't have a drill when we first got started, we did something like this, where we'd put our fertilizer out and throw some rye seed or some triticale seed and just broadcast it on the crop. And the next spring, it worked okay. There's some of that cereal rye coming up. And on the far right, that seed was germinated sitting on top of the soil, and it did grow. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And we watched what happened. We watched what we did. That was probably the most important thing, was when you experiment with something, then you go observe it, right? And you kind of try and follow what you liked and what you didn't like. So when we got the drill, then we were able to do a little more stuff. We started planting on the left there. That would be, we did a fall biennial mix, so it'd be triticale, maybe that one might have had some peas, some Austrian winter peas in there. And that's an old alfalfa and kind of alfalfa grass stand. It was alfalfa, and the grass kind of crept in there because the stand got old. So we wanted to get some more production out of it. And that works really well after your last crop. You get in there and get the seed in the ground in the fall, and it'll come up next spring with the alfalfa. This one on the right, a lot of people really wondered what we were doing there, but we actually put dividers in our corn drill, or in our grain drill, so we could drill corn at 30 inches into a green standing cover crop. So we really started, and this is when we started to understand how important it is to have something on your soil growing all the time, feeding that biology. Because we made a few mistakes between the time we got our drill and when we were first getting into it. And once you get your biology alive and you don't have something green, the biology will consume whatever's in the ground to eat, right? Just like you and I. If we're in this room long enough, we'll start eating the coffee beans back there, maybe a cup or two if they really keep us in here long enough. We might see Adam start eating his cushion there that he's sitting on if we really stay in here. But the biology will do the same thing, and then what will happen is your aggregates will collapse and your soil will become hard, and then you've gone backwards. And we did that early on. And so by planting our corn into a cover crop, if we don't have something on the soil, in that particular case where the soil was bare, so we knew we had to have a cover crop in the spring, then we terminated the cover crop and the corn did come through. We learned some things, and it wasn't the best corn crop we had, but it was good enough to get the job done, and we made some money on that. So then our conservation district got a John Deere no-till drill. That's a 16-footer. That's a great drill. We really enjoy using that drill, and they're nice enough to us to allow us to hold it for them and help other people get a hold of it. And so what we're doing there is we just fed the cows on that for a couple months in the winter, and then we kind of let the spring moisture get in there and left it alone for a few weeks, and then we went in with a 12-way mix, sorghum Sudan and millets and brassicas and some clovers, and we just put it right in there. So I got a picture here in a little bit where that shows how it looked. So I'm not here to tell anybody a lie that we haven't had any problems and cover crops have been the solve all and the solution to all our problems, because we have. I don't know if you guys know what weeds are. You probably don't have that problem where you're from, but down on the irrigated ground in Tremont, every time we put some water out, we put a whole new crop of weeds out with it. Our neighbors are nice enough to pass them down the ditch, and it flows through and it comes down to us, right? And then we pass our weeds down to the next guy, and it just goes on and on. So the most important thing we learned there is, you know, in our late planting and our summer planting, the weeds, if the soil was bare, the weeds are already going. And you can go out and you can observe, you know, they're just there waiting for the opportunity. And when the sun hits and the heat hits, they really blow up. So we had to learn how important it was to keep that armor on the soil. And that's an ongoing battle in our situation, because we're beef people, right? We're trying to feed everything off and take everything we can take. But with this system, you can't always do that. And you give a little and you get a lot more back. So the more bare soil we have, the more weeds we got. And that's just the way it was. It was just basic math. And then another complication we ran into is our herbicide, our spray down at the right time. So sometimes the weeds in this system, when your biology gets active, your weeds get growing enough so fast that you can't beat them even with a good herbicide. You might set them back, but if you don't have your crop ready to plant, or you don't have the timing right on your next situation you're ready to go into. So we learned how to kind of plan ahead and be always looking ahead with this system. You're always looking one crop ahead and planning around your cash crop, what your cover crops are going to be, and how to keep that soil covered. And we feel like we've got a better handle on that now. Maybe our neighbors wouldn't think so, but we're trying. So I'm going to go through some of our mixes. I know Marlon, if you were at the beginner's course, Marlon talked a lot about, you know, some of how to design a mix and some of the mixes that he would recommend. And we do something really similar, and probably because we learned from the same idea. But the fall biennial's under nitrogen fixing. So if we come in after a corn silage crop, which we would chop off, we'll do something like this. We'll do a light triticale planting with a winter pea and a collard and a daikon radish to capture whatever nitrogen's left over from the corn. And then depending on what we're going to do the next spring, we'll go heavy or light on the hairy vetch. That produces a lot of biomass and cycles a lot of nitrogen in the soil. So we really like that one. With our grain corn, we have tried a few different things like beans, a couple of different beans. Garbanzo beans was one. Clovers. We never, when we planted them with the corn, we never planted them at a high enough rate to worry about a yield drop with the corn. So it worked okay. The chickling vetch, we tried hairy vetch one time. I'm going to tell you right now, don't plant hairy vetch with your corn at the same time, because it will grow right up with your corn. It will be just as tall as your corn. And if you've ever tried to combine green hairy vetch, it's like combine mesh. It just sits around the stripper augers, and there you are, cleaning it out underneath. But, you know, as you can see a little bit further down there, that corn stubble and vetch, that was Mother Nature showing us that, well, maybe combining's not the right idea, but if you want to graze that, 11.5% crude protein, 175 RFE, that's pretty good feed. I think a cow in her third trimester could do really well on that late in the winter. And we did do that because I got tired of pulling the vetch out of the combine header. So we had a few acres there where we grazed it. BMR sorghum is one we put in any mix we're gonna try and forage. Of course, that BMR has that extra carbon molecule, so we get a little better weight gain on some of our grazing opportunities there. So sun hemp works really well in our area, cycles a lot of nitrogen, grows tall, grows fast. Cubam clover works well, same thing. A hubam gives us a flower too. So if we're going to maturity, it's kind of like alfalfa. It produces that flower on there, but it gets a lot taller than alfalfa. And I got a picture I'll show you there in a little bit. But you can see, I also wanted to point out too, because I had a few questions about that brown in that. That is frost. That's frost-bitten sorghum Sudan. But because we don't pull our cows out when the frost hits that, because there's 11 other species in that mix, including a small grain, probably a fall trit or something like that. And if that triticale don't taste right to those heifers for whatever reason, they just go to eating something else. And we've never had sickness, we've never had a problem. So we feel like the diversity is probably what's helped us with that situation. And then again, we tested the sorghum Sudan grass in December after it had froze down. 9% crude protein, 89 RFE, so not as good as that corn stubble vetch mix, because it really wasn't as green. I mean, there was almost no green to it, but pretty good crude protein for being frozen, we felt like. The didn't have as much value, not even half that, so that's why I put that up there. So this is that fall mix that we would have planted maybe after a corn silage crop. So that's what it would look like after we grazed it. As you can see, that's really covered the soil. There's still some stock standing there. The manure's scattered. The cows are kind of in the background because they didn't want to be in the picture. I don't blame them. I don't like being in pictures either. But we left that like that. I think we had 175 pairs on there, 170 or so, for 2 weeks. They took it down to that. We pulled them out. We took them up to the range ground. And about 30 days later, that was a full crop again. I mean, it shot right back. The triticale, the vetch, came back really good. You know, obviously and even some of the peas came back. The kale, the collards didn't come back as strong, and that's after the grazing. But they were there when we first went in. So, and that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish there. So then the second crop gives us the option, right? We can hay it, or we can graze it again if we wanted to leave some cattle down there, or we can do whatever we need to do with it. We even probably could have harvested it for seed. It looked pretty good. So here's a couple of different examples of what our mixes would look like in the summer. You can see that brown strip there in the sorghum, the BMR strip there. That's kind of what it looks like. This picture on the right here is where that John Deere no-till drill was drilling into that field that we fed onto. We put no fertilizer on that. Of course, the cows did all the fertilizing for us. We did no spray, no chemical of any kind. We just $30 an acre into the seed, and we just put it in and we watered it up and watered it one other time, and we ran out of water and had to go to corn. So that was all I got. So there's some variation in some height there you can see, and I wanted to point out on that is what that is there's a little heavy residue right there where it's a little shorter where I took that picture. I was looking for that spot because it's the only spot I could stand in the field without being overcrowded by all the crops. So, but yeah, that was a little heavy bale residue. So just management on that, we can fine tune some of that. This is a new one we did this last year. Thing we tried, and it worked pretty good. We have a heavy piece of ground, real heavy piece of ground there by my brother's house. That's his yard in the background there, and we keep that no-till drill, the districts there, and so it was real handy to just grab it and go. But we had our insoluble salts on our soil testing got a little high, and so we planted barley and oats with the idea that we'd chop it all off to try and mine some of those salts off of there. And we got a pretty good crop. I think it was close to 5 tons to the acre, if I remember right. And then the next day we went right in and drilled this 12-way mix in there. Excuse me. And we put it in. It was a little dry, so we put some water to it. Some of the field, about half of that field we watered, and half we didn't. And 45 days later, we put some heifers in there to knock it down and put some weight on them, finish them. must be talking too much. That one we felt like, the thing I guess what I wanted to mention there was we couldn't figure out which one was the cash crop and which one was the cover crop. So, because the cows gained over almost 2 3/4 pounds a day on that stuff, and we were moving them twice a week. We wished we could have done more, but that's what time allowed us to do, right? You got to work with your circumstance, work with what you can live with, what you can get done, because the whole idea is to improve our quality of life a little bit. But they were gaining 2 3/4 pounds a day, and they were in there for just over 3 months. And so we took them from 750 to 1050, and that weight to us selling direct to the consumer is worth about $6 a pound. So if you do the math on a 300-pound gain, like I said, and that one was 5 ton and whatever feed's worth on a 3-way, 5 ton to the acre, we just couldn't decide which one was the cash crop and which one was the cover crop. So, and then there was still quite a bit of residue after that, and I wish I'd have went out and took a picture, but after that all froze and the cows were gone, and we got that August rain, where the cows were, it got a little mucky, but we just kept moving them, and that August rain brought up the small grain that's in there, that annual ryegrass, and the field was green again, and there it was. And so it got tall enough, we put some late calving cows out there, and they've been grazing all winter. We haven't fed them yet. So this is that Hubam clover. This is a good picture of what that can do. It grows really well in our area. It as you can see there with the sorghum Sudan in it and the Sudan grass, and the millet, it grew right up as tall as that. And that one we let go to maturity, and we did silage that off. We tried to cut it, about 6 inches high to try and leave something, but the swather was grunting and groaning a little bit through some of that, if I remember right. So that's another example of a mix. What I wanted to point out too, I had a question about some of these mixes in the last training I did, and when we plant these high variety multi-species, what we've noticed is some years a few of them do a lot better, and then the next year if we do a similar mix, some of the different varieties might do a lot better. And we're still learning and figuring out the reasons why behind that, but I really feel like these high diverse mixes help us cover our bases a lot better. We can accomplish so much more. We can meet a lot more goals at the same time with a diverse mix. And Mother Nature has a way of kind of taking care of us, I feel like, and keeping our production up when we give her the option to do it. So a little bit about our soil tests. So Marlon Winger, again, at the class the other day, showed us all how to do our infiltration rate tests and our compaction testing. They had that tool they were using that to penetrate the soil and give us a reading. So at 300 PSI, the plant roots can't penetrate that. And we seen that, and I don't know if anybody was in here, was in our group, but we hit 300 right next to it. We dug up an alfalfa root, and we hit 300, and the root had done this, did a 90 degree and found a softer spot and went down. And so that was kind of interesting to see that. And anyway, so in 2019, Marlon come out with the NRCS and other state conservationists and did a couple samples. So this is only after 2 years. That second inch, if you remember right, the first inch is to saturate the soil. The second inch tells you what you can penetrate or what you can infiltrate. We did that in 7 minutes. So the score on that, and I forget the formula, but he gave us a score of infiltrating 8.5 inches per hour. If you know anything about Tremont, I don't think on the records we've ever had a storm of 8.5 inches in an hour. Have we, Orson? You're an expert. When you irrigate? When the dam broke? and the ditch bank washed out. And somebody asked me in our last meeting, what do we see that with our flood? How does that relate to our flood irrigating? Like, I've got another talk I can give on that, but just all the different scenarios we've seen when we do flood irrigate. But that ground will hold a lot more water now, and it's getting better, I feel like. So the compaction when it was dry, let's see, with no moisture on that same spot, we tested the compaction. We were able to go 5.5 inches, right? Not very far in a dry scenario. But after that second inch was applied, we went almost a foot, 11.5. So a little better. And then in 2021, I forget our exact infiltration right now, but it's quite a bit better. That second inch is closer to 5, 4.5 to 5 minutes to get that second inch in there. What I wanted to point out here was we have a field now that's reached 3.2% organic matter, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that field because it was a good learning experience for us. And again, it was purely, it was one of Mother Nature's accidents that she handed us a lesson in. And so this was a field that we had, it was alfalfa hay, and we had fed back. We tried really hard to feed back everything we'd taken off to replace those nutrients, replace that carbon, and keep armor on the soil. And we felt like we did an okay job for a few years, and then we thought, well, it's time to get a little more diversity in there, and we were going to take the hay out and plant a cover crop. And we took that. We didn't chemically take the hay out. We swathed the first crop came up. We figured it would because there was a little spring moisture, and we swathed that hay off, and we planted that. It was kind of a spring mix cover crop. It had some oats and some barley, and then it had some Sudan grass because it was getting into the later spring, and a few brassicas in there. Had some forage collards, and we weren't able to water it because we didn't have any rain, of course, and so we had to get water and some other things, some corn and some other things. And we kind of forgot about it. I think we were just so mad that we couldn't get to water on that field that it was going to be a loss, and so we kind of forgot about it, went on doing our other things, and driving by one day, we noticed that the second crop was growing. So we let it do its thing, and it grew, and we got a second crop out of it. I think first crop was a little weak. Second crop was better than first crop. And we thought, well, that's probably all we'll get. And then we noticed about 30 days later that the third crop was growing and green. And we watched that go, and it looked a little better. And still no cover crops or nothing. There was a few that were trying to germinate in certain spots, but didn't look very good on the cover crop side that we had no-tilled into it. But third crop started to burn up, and so we went ahead and cut it a little earlier than we would have, and we thought that was it. And then Mother Nature sent us a gift. She sent us 2.5 inches of rain in August, and the cover crop came. And if I'd have been smart, I'd have documented it a little better. But the tonnage that we yielded off the cover crop out of that alfalfa field replaced the tonnage that we lost and that we were a little short on the first 3 crops. I mean, it was a fantastic yield. We never irrigated that field. And it was just I share that little story with you because it just proved to me how true that statement is. For every 1% of organic matter, you can hold 16,500 gallons of water. We feel like because that field, when we tested it, that was the answer. 3.2% organic matter, that's what allowed that situation to happen, was that extra water we were able to hold on our farm. So that was a blessing in disguise for us making a mistake, I guess, but putting the seed in the ground anyway. And so now I tell people, because of that story, you have to put the seed in the ground no matter what, because if you don't, you'll never get anything. But if you do, you might get a miracle. And whatever rate that is, you have to decide. What is your pocketbook going to allow? What are you going to be able to sleep with at night? What is that seeding rate going to be? So now on a lot of our fields, we feel like we're getting through that deeper compaction layer. So this field was right after the spring thaw and the ground had opened up, and it's still kind of cold, but we could push. In fact, I think I went out with a 3/8 fiberglass rod and pushed it 18 inches in the ground. And I just kind of lost my grip on the rod, so that's as far as I went. But 18 inches, you know, that was deeper than any maybe as deep as the ripping that we used to do, I don't know. But that's a lot better than what it used to be. So, and I drove out on that field, you know, just after the snow came off, so it feels like it's squishy under your feet. But I drove out and tested how far I could push that rod in there. So we can drill in those conditions. So that's a big advantage once you get the soil and the seed in the ground. This is what some of our soils look like. And that's a turnip there. Somebody told me that turnips won't over winter. I guess depending on the winter, it was trying to grow back. Anyway, that was supposed to be a winter terminated cover crop. We're learning. Does anyone here look at themselves as a light farmer? I know we're maybe grass farmers or cattle ranchers, but if you own land and you grow something, you're a light farmer as well. This is something that we focus on in our operation when we build our mixes, is capturing light. So there's two rules about light farming. You want to build your photosynthetic capacity. So that's simply the ability that mix has to capture the light, which is why we have the diversity. No matter which angle the sun is shining, I'm getting everything before it gets to the ground. That's increasing my soil biology. That's increasing my nitrogen in the soil. I'm fixing more root exudates, feeding the biology. And then enhancing that photosynthetic rate. The plant's rate that it has. So the best way that I can explain that is like when we go in and graze that plant wants to rapidly produce and regrow. Like its goal, right, is to get to its stage 3, to get to reproduction stage. So you enhance that rate. So that's part of the reason why we started grazing cover crops in the summer. We can speed up our building soil, our rate of building soil. We can increase that a lot faster. So again, our mixes are diverse. I believe that field again is that where I was no-tilling into that 12-way mix in where we fed the cows. And then this is a spring grain. So we don't always plant our barley or wheat or oats. This one's oats. We don't always plant them monoculture anymore. If we need to, we'll put something else in there. So that's a berseem clover plant and kale. And most of the time, if you don't terminate it, and you get a little rain in the fall, that'll grow right back, and the cows love it. We did have a little snow on the ground for a few weeks anyway, and that happened to be right when we were grazing some of that regrowth. And I think she was pretty happy. She looked up and posed for me for a second, then she went right back to her meal. She didn't want to spend too much time looking at me, so. One of the things we also tried this year that we had moderate success with was interseeding. You've seen the interseeder out here. The conservation districts are trying to get a hold of more of those, so we had this opportunity. That was a radish that we grew there. I had to shoo the deer away from that spot to be able to get out there. But where our soil was more bare is where we had more success with the interseeding, in my opinion. We try to focus maybe more on a heavy cover crop before or something after the corn, because we can get a lot more tonnage and a lot more growth out of it. But for any scenario where there's bare soil in the corn, I would highly recommend that. I felt like that was highly beneficial to us for that particular field, and it did okay, and the corn came off. Does anyone really like to see a lot of deer on their farm? because if you do, then this is what you want to do. We had a lot of deer hit on the roads around our farm after we cut that corn off. They love that. They love those radishes and those brassicas. I think they ate more of it than our cows did. So some of the different ways we harvest. So we're a beef operation. So if we can graze it, that's great. We chop, we bale. So we're still doing some of those things. We're trying to be a little more mindful about where those nutrients are going now. So there's an example of, we cut that top picture. We're going to chop that and silage it. That's a diverse mix of mostly a sorghum Sudan millet, has some sun hemp and some other clovers in it. Yielded very well, and we chopped it early enough, and you can't quite tell. I should have taken a lower picture, but it's about a 4 to 6 inch stubble. That's what we were trying to aim for. We should have gone higher, but we needed the feed. But we did leave something, and we got some regrowth. I've already showed you that picture there. That's what we would target if we were grazing it. That's what we'd try to make it look like. And we do a lot of winter grazing, as you can see, on the farm, corn stalks and regrowth, and we're kind of always planning and managing for that. That helps us get our manure out back on the farm too. So this is that field that's on the top there. So it regrew it got about a foot tall when winter hit, and we put some cow-calf pairs on there, some late calvers, some fall calvings, pairs. And we had feed at the top of that hill. We were feeding some other calves and stuff up there, but they didn't want to come up. They wanted that frozen down sorghum Sudan grass with some clover in it. So they were pretty content there for quite a while. And we didn't have to haul water to them in that scenario. The snow was just right, so that was nice. Again, just another picture of, we took a small grain crop off. We planted a 12-way mix, a highly diverse mix, and so we're grazing that. I think that's probably early December, maybe late November. Finally, we're working on applying these principles to our range. So I just wanted to show this picture. It's a picture that taught me a lesson, so I wanted to share that. You can't quite see it real easy because it's a high tensile wire, but there's a hot fence there just left of the ranger track. So what happened here was our neighbors had about the same amount of cows as us on this side the year before, and he grazed like we always used to graze, and you turn a certain amount out in that area, and you just leave them all summer, and because that's what that would hold. And the year before in the fall, you know how dry it was in our area. We didn't get any rain, and the difference of what you see with the green on this side and the brown on there is because we came off and let that grass regrow before we went back. So, they talk about moving your cattle more often to let the grass grow. And we hadn't done a whole lot of that. We've always moved our cows, but we usually graze it down before we move them. So what we experimented with up there was moving them after they'd only maybe grazed the top third. I think in that scenario, they just it wasn't even half. And then we moved them, and it regrew, and we grazed it again, and moved them, and grazed it again. And it actually kept growing through the summer, and it stayed vegetative. Our calves looked pretty good coming off of that. But this is the next spring. How fast. So this is early in April. I'm up fixing fence, and I actually called him and said, I think we're going to have cows up here, 1st of May. And there was a long hesitation, and then it was awkward for a minute. I think he thought I was crazy, but he hadn't been up there and seen what I seen. So I just wanted to show that to kind of, it was something that kind of proved to us that, yeah, that's a principle we want to be looking at pretty seriously. Heavier rotations, moving your cows more, leaving more to let that regrowth come in. And one of the things we're noticing, as you can see there, it says increased plant diversity. So when we started doing that, we started noticing more plants were growing. In fact, we had some wild sunflowers that grew. I don't think can't see them in that picture, but we had some wild sunflowers that grew in that, and which attracts some more birds, which we hadn't seen a pheasant in quite a few years, and I think that year we had a few on there, so they were probably the only two in Oneida County. And then increased grazing time. We still graze the same amount of AUMs as we did before, which I thought was pretty cool. You know, we put more cattle in for a shorter amount of time, but got the same amount of AUMs, and we're going back up earlier on that same piece. So again, you can see, I mean, keeping them in closer bunches. What we're doing here is dabbling with interseeding into grass mixes. We haven't perfected that yet, but we're trying something. We're failing at something. Ask our neighbors, we're good at failing at something. And that's why, because we're always trying something. But we're interseeding maybe some diversity. That was just a crested wheat pasture and with a lot of bare dirt. So the spring seeding didn't work as good, but when we seeded it in the fall, that worked a lot better. So fall seedings, probably because the grass was established and outgrew the spring seeding. But so a couple things we're looking at towards the future there. So I guess with that, take any questions. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, I feel like we've gotten more pushback than maybe we wanted, maybe we were anticipating. But, you know, every opportunity, every comment or every question is an opportunity to have a conversation about it, right? So nothing's really bad if you look at it in the right perspective. But yeah, I think Dad got asked, he was just telling me last night at dinners, one of the neighbors asked him if we were even farming anymore. And he thought about it for a minute, and I'll share his answer. No, we're not, we don't farm it. We drill and we harvest and maybe spray if we need a spray. So, I mean, and so I guess a lot, you know, when you're accustomed to looking at a field a certain way, maybe you want that clean plowed look, and that's okay. And, you know, if that works for a guy, that's great. His soil health's probably not going forward, but maybe he's maintaining. But the idea behind that comment that when we talked about it was, well, we have so much more time. And you know, I tell our neighbors, because, you know, I'm not going to lie to anybody, our production came off some, especially when we first started and we were figuring it out. We've got our production back up a little bit now. But I'll tell them too, our input costs have come off a lot more than just some. You know, we're 50% fertilizer now. So when I tell people that, then the conversation changes a little bit. So, you know your bottom line. That's where the conversation always turns to. Know your bottom line, know where you start so that you can try and maintain that, but increase your quality of life. That's been the biggest blessing for our operation is the time. We have so much more time. We picked up another 180 acres, and we still feel like we have more time in the spring. So hopefully our focus can go where we want it to go, is to the rangeland and start to improve that. Good question. I think you're going to see a lot more houses in Tremont before you see a lot more cover crops. Yeah, I think there's still some uphill battles to gain. Hopefully, you know, when our state gets some of these plot grounds going, we can really analyze some heavy data and take a more serious look at it. I hope people will take a more serious look at it, especially if they don't like their current model, or if there's something about it that they feel like's broken. You know, if they don't like spending $100,000 a year on fertilizer, whatever their bill is. You know, ours was twice what I make annually in a salary, and our farm's not that big. So, you know, that's a big cut for us to cut 50% fertilizer and maintain a decent enough yield that we're satisfied that our bottom line's increased. So yeah, I hope there'll be some more serious look at it, and if I can ever help or answer any questions, I'm always happy to do that. AJ. I know Kellogg's has spent several $billion in plots and in research and incentivizing, and they have a goal that they want their cereal all, you know, down the road and within several years being raised on regenerative ranching and farming operations. That's where they want their grains because the nutrients is there. What they're focusing on is the nutrient density. You can't get that without soil biology. Steve. Yeah, so I wish we had, so water usage efficiency is the question. So I wish we had more monitoring stations on our operation. It's just not feasible for us to put some of those in to actually quantify that in numbers. So a little bit about real quick what we're seeing in our flood irrigation. So our initial irrigation is generally been longer is what we're seeing. And we're kind of trying to track that by time because our water system functions off time. We get a certain amount of time of water. And so that first irrigation, and now that we understand that, we kind of plan for it, but it's taken us a longer time to get over our fields. And that initially hurt us. But now, once we got through the first year of that happening, I think that happened in 2019 was when we first started seeing that. So after a couple years of doing it, now that we plan for that, we can get around that. But then what we noticed was the next time we go over it, it's less than half, or it's half. You know, it cuts that time significantly. So it more than, I guess the short answer in your question is, when we track those hours, we are irrigating less hours on a field or on a specific crop. So we feel like that's the right direction. We had a spring show up in our river bottoms that we hadn't had before, and it actually made a big mess. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but we got a handle on it. Yeah.
Your first two slides kind of hit home with me, that's what brought me here. The saltwater situation very much the same. Is that too much when the snow melts and you can't deal with it? People go back, reflood irrigating, and remember back to the year over ahead, what? But we'll be back again on the same field a week later just because we got no place else to go, and if it doesn't have saltwater, there's no way. But then our soil won't hold that much, it dries up. And I just, how much have you seen your growing season be able to be extended by storing more water in the ground?
That's a good question. You know, extending the growing season by holding more water.
Yeah, I mean, you have to figure out how much you can store and stuff, but I just, you notice if you're able to keep from what like that second slide, 2 weeks later, or how much?
Right. So when you were talking there, I was thinking about back 3 years ago when everybody's fields were underwater in northern Utah because the ground froze and all the snow came off, and there was a river. In fact, I'll probably replace that slide, the waterfall slide, with that picture. There was a river going in front of our silage pit. And we were really hoping that that was going in our ground. We were thinking, man, we're trying to do everything right. Maybe we get some of that in the ground, but the ground was still froze solid. So there's nothing you can do in that scenario. But if you can get your organic matter to increase and get your infiltration rates up, I would strongly encourage that you're doing those aggregation tests to know where you start, to know where you get to. They don't take very long. I mean, unless the water won't go in that 6-inch ring. But, you know, you can walk away and go do something else, put a GoPro on it or something. But, yeah, so the short answer would be, yeah, we know we're holding more water just because of our irrigation timings. The time we're spending putting water on the field is shortened. So that tells me that the water's staying in there, and once the ground absorbs it, the water goes over it, right?
In Jimmy's presentation, he had where he parked the center pivot in one place and put on the 7 inches. We invested in 2 center pivots to help us handle that spring runoff without, having to get out there. So, but, anyway, we're running our center pivots when we have water as fast as we can. We're putting on our 1/3 of an inch a circle. And he put on 7 inches. We got way more water running off, so I gotta change that.
Yeah, and the time that he has been in improving his soil, his aggregation, you know, he's quite a few years ahead of probably where we're at. Yeah. Yeah, Joe's the expert here. Ask Joe. Infiltrate. Joe, are you trying to leave something on the soil as well on those fields you're talking about? Take as much as you can. Feed those cows, huh? Yeah, I would agree with Joe on our operation. Our goal first is the roots. You know, we've increased seeding rates in some cases. We've changed some of the crops that we would plant. Sorghum, Sudan grasses, huge root mass. You get a lot of root structure with those. The curse word to the seed guys in here is cereal rye. If you're not in a highly wheat productive area, you know, be careful where you use it. But yeah, we've used some of that in certain instances. Its root mass is just extremely better than the other small grains. Yeah. In fact, I don't know if they uploaded it, but I had a video of. Tony, do you know if that got uploaded? That water video? Didn't. Okay. We'll do that another time, or if you want to come up after, I'll show you. But cereal rye, it's a video of showing the water coming off our field when we flood irrigate. It kind of simulate like a heavy rainstorm, right? And it's going in, washing off the edge of the field, and it would go down into the river. And the water's clean and pure. And what sped that up for us, because it was a field that we had leased recently, we feel like the cereal rye, and we did a heavier planting, a seeding rate, sped that process up. And it's just the root structure in there, so. Yeah, roots are first and foremost, and then ground cover would be the second thing I'd mention. Adam, and then right here. Yeah, and I think it was maybe a little lower than 1.5 when we started, 1.4. Yeah. Yep, took 5 years. And we were still harvesting the crop off of that every year, and then feeding it back on was what we were doing there, kind of like Joe was saying. Yeah, yeah. the carbon, and then we stopped tilling, right? So we've allowed the habitat for all the biology. We've quit, like Jimmy said, we quit plowing through their tent. We've left their home, their habitat be there, so. Yeah, right here, you had a question? That's a private ground we have up there, so we're able to play with that a little easier than maybe some public ground would be. Yeah, that's private ground, yep. Yep. Yeah. Sure, interseeding into perennials. Yeah, I've had plenty of failures as well. Yeah, perennials is a little tricky for us. We're primarily a cool season environment. So your cool season biennials or cool season annuals are kind of the target growth. But if you can do a warm season annual, you're gonna have better luck in our experience. So are you terminating? I guess I should ask, are you terminating or are you not terminating? You don't want to terminate it? To set it back a little bit, yeah. Yeah, so, and we've experimented with that as well. I've never had good luck planting anything during the growing season in a cool season perennial grass. There's probably more experts out there than me. Jimmy might be the guy to talk to there, but what has worked for us is a fall biennial. Go in there when after you graze that grass, however it is. Try and leave a little. If you can leave 4 inches of grass at least, that'll help protect the new seedling. You'll get a lot more growth out of that new plant the next spring. But we've had luck with fall biennials. It's the only scenario we've had luck with. No water. This is a dry land scenario for us. So we would take like that crested wheat field that I had a picture of with the drill going in it. We tried spring planting, a couple of different varieties, even warm season varieties. They wouldn't outcompete the grass that was already growing there. It was already established. And even though it wasn't very thick, I mean, we had a few plants try to come up, but they didn't ever do anything. But when we did fall biennials the next year, that worked. They came up. We had a pretty good, decent stand and a lot more feed. So, yeah, that's what's worked for us. One more, the lucky one. You don't have to. I'm fine not talking. All right, fine. We don't have a lot of irrigated grass on our operation, but I know guys that have done it. If you're terminating the grass, yeah. If you don't have a no-till drill, I think you'd have a hard time making good seed to soil contact, depending on how thick the grass was. If it's really thin, you could probably get away with a regular box drill. We are actually going to try some this spring, so I can tell you how that turned out. It's a Timothy stand and it's really thick, but we are going to use a no-till drill. You could try a light surface tillage. I'm not a big fan of that because you got a lot of biology in the surface of your soil that's trying to build a home and a root structure. But if you have to do it, right, you have to do it. You got to get the seed in the ground somehow to the soil. So, yeah. Thank you, guys.